Hey, sometimes it's hard not to paint everybody with the same broad brush. Sometimes. And sometimes it's even harder to try and explain something that seems so freaking obvious. And yet people don't quite understand. And they get all wrapped around the axle. And you have to fight with people that should know better. And I want to talk about the underfunded public schools in America. And I want to try and quickly paint a picture. Now, mind you, this could be a much deeper conversation. First things first, let me explain. There is no constitutional right to an education. Did you know that? Did you know that education is a states' rights thing, period? There is no federal law really covering a right to an education. And more to the point, since states are currency users, not currency issuers, their public schools are funded by what's ever left over in the budget. So schools that are underfunded, not only are they run down and dingy, not only are the supplies and equipment dingy, not only are the people that can work in those schools extremely underpaid, but every aspect of the system is geared towards failure. And yet we demand the most from it. God, it's our children, right? Now, this is your neurotypical children. This is the ones that go to school, they wake up in the morning and for the most part don't have any issues with assimilation, so to speak, And when they get through school, they come home, they do their homework, etc. And for families that are whole and complete, that whole homework scenario works just fine. No, sort of. No, no. Parents are working longer hours. They don't have as much time with each other, much less with their kids. So all of a sudden now, every bit of the public school system is really, really down to freaking table scraps, crumbs, if that. And that plays right into the hands of the school choice, the privatization, the charter school gang. Now, I'd like to say this is a distinctly right-wing issue, but it's unfortunately not. There are many libertarians parading around as progressives right now, championing charter schools and school choice. And the reason why these things are even an issue at all is because the school systems are so terrifyingly underfunded. Now, what I want to do is now take a moment to talk about the non-neurotypical child, the child with autism, the child with some other, condition that makes traditional education near impossible. There are always exceptions, but these children need to be integrated. They need to be able to have an opportunity to be a part of society. They shouldn't be treated as other. They shouldn't be shoved off somewhere else. And so when you look at what it takes to build an environment, not only for neurotypical kids to be able to succeed in life, but also non-neurotypical kids. You look at the biological needs of children from physical education and gymnastics and other sorts of things that keep them growing, both their physiological condition as well as their mental condition. But then you look at the nutrition that goes in this as well, because a kid that's malnourished or given poor diet is going to have a very difficult time learning. So it just keeps adding all this stuff in, right? And in come these self-centered bastards that want charter schools, these for-profit charter schools, these schools that are run by private-public partnerships. These schools, they're literally bleeding off resources from the public school system. But here's the thing. This is the gotcha. The public school system could be fully funded, completely funded, and then some. You could spend the kind of money we spend on football stadiums for our kids' schools in each county, each area. There's no reason that we shouldn't invest heavily in the state-of-the-art everything when it comes to our children's education. But instead, we throw table scraps and then we wonder why some kids succeed and others don't. We wonder why it's so dog eat dog and there's such a huge divide. Well, it's not hard to understand that the wealthy keep finding ways to get into separate education, different education, different access to high quality education while everyone else is left behind. And I've seen too many people try to defend this because they say, and rightfully so, that the public school system is failing them. But whenever you starve any program of the resources that it needs, whenever your imagination is stifled by a false scarcity narrative, you will never begin to fathom what you could do for the children, for our entire society. I haven't even talked about college. This is just K through 12. This is just public education. We have made it such just an absolute wreck that it gives people that don't understand federal finance, that don't understand the role of the federal government and the state government and the way currency flows. It makes those people think, hey, the schools are failing. It's up to progressives to not cave into the libertarian logic that, oh, well, public schools fail our kids, we must privatize and give it to some for-profit entity to try and make a buck on training our children. This is a failure of society in such a horrific way that I can't begin to tell you how much my heart grieves that people in our movement support candidates that support charter schools, private schools, and ultimately school choice. You know, it sounds totalitarian when you hear it like that. And why is that? Because once again, the failure to understand the capabilities of a federal government that could fund the diversity of education families require and desire at a public level to provide the best and most varied education that any of our kids could ever want. There is no reason we have to do a cookie cutter one-size-fits-all approach. We could radically change the way we view education. And it shouldn't just be preparing kids for working in some company. It should be preparing them for life. It should teach them how to balance their books, their budget, their own checkbook. It should teach them how to drive a car or whatever it is that we want them to do. Whatever it takes to survive in society, we should be able to train them. And we shouldn't be forcing parents to chip in. There's no need for it. Public money is plenty. It's infinity. All money is a creature of the state. All money is a creature of the state, at least in terms of the currency of that nation. And when you consider the United States and the U.S. dollar, and you recognize that when Congress appropriates funds, all funds are created. And when you consider the fact that the Fed is merely a manager of interest rates and that fiscal policy is actually about money, then you start beginning to understand that Congress can direct funds and actually freaking make them go to every school. Imagine a complete infrastructure rebuild of our entire education system. How many jobs do you think would grow out of that? You know, for those people out there that think the robots are coming. How many, if we retrofitted every school in America, how many jobs? Now, mind you, unless you don't have any kind of brain in that little skull cap of yours, you recognize that every single school, every single thing you build has a depreciation on it. It has a life cycle on it. It has a maintenance schedule on it. And all of the maintenance and everything else equals jobs. Now, what if you decided that no school, no classroom should have more than, say, 20 kids in it ever? How many more teachers would you need? And what should you pay a teacher to give them the right incentive, to make them want to make a career out of education, to make it prestigious enough that people fight to become teachers, to want to serve children? The Serf Society. Now, I was fighting with some person called North Carolina School Choice or something like this on Twitter. And I'm just listening to this individual saying, it's not your money to do, it's not your kid to do, it's not, and it was just this vapid and vacuous 10th Amendment garbage. Another 10th fight. One of these, all in the name of my freedoms. But you got to understand something. When education is not a right, and the rich can buy their way to the best, and the poor are left with the rest, we have the society we have today. Inequality rampant. People ill-equipped for life, much less careers. People having to go to college just to get entry-level positions. Folks, we have destroyed the intellectual capacity of our nation. I want you to think about that. And when you think about candidates that support charter schools, you think about candidates that support school choice, I want you to think about the fact that they are literally so inept, so lacking in imagination, so uneducated when it comes to how economics works. When they don't understand where dollars come from and they don't understand the abundance that our federal government can spend into education. And when you see, for example, as my son, who has gone 2 years with a prescription for what they call a TSS, and they couldn't find anybody to be a TSS for 2 years. 2 years he's been on a waiting list. Do you know what the requirements for a TSS are? Next to nothing. And do you know how much they pay them? Next to nothing. And do you know what a TSS does? They take children with situations such as autism and help integrate them and include them in activities at schools that teachers otherwise would leave them be. And for 2 years, my son's gone without. Why? Because there's no funding? No, because there's nobody out there wants to do these jobs. They don't pay squat. You can go flip a burger at McDonald's and make the same amount of money with less stress. And that tells you how little value they place on children. And that should tell you why it is so screwed up that any candidate would be about charter schools, school choice, or private education. Our nation deserves better. We must do better. And you're not going to do that if you don't understand that A, we don't have a right to education in this country still. There's no law that says it. 2, states are dependent on tax revenues. But when you deal with the federal government creates money whenever it spends. The federal government could encumber dollars to ensure that states take care of building schools with that money, that they take care of ensuring that these kids have a quality education, and that teachers are paid a salary that makes it so that we truly show that we value what they bring to our children. Let those buildings, if we're going to build monuments, let those schools become monuments. Let those schools become all the high-tech wizardry we need in the public sector, in the private sector, whatever. If it can be an industry, it can be in that school. There's no reason we have to cut corners on our schools. There's no reason we have to cut corners on our children's education. And yet there are people that are running for president today that are supposedly progressives, that support charter schools, that support private education, that support school choice. And that should be a canceling stance, because it's a dereliction of leadership. It's a dereliction of knowledge. And worse off, it's a smear of integrity, a lack thereof. I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progress in Action. Have a great night, everyone.